Hi, my name is Alex. I'm here with Juliane, Zachhuber to do an episode on gods and religion in Greece. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm a DPhil student here looking at Roman religion, so Greek religion is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but that's kind of why we thought we'd bring you along and have a look around ancient Greece to tell us a little bit about religion. What's your speciality?
So I work on, lots of aspects of Greek religion. I wrote my PhD thesis on the religion of the island of Rhodes, but now I lecture on all sorts of bits of Greek religion at Reading.
Fantastic. So let's plunge in. So I've started us off here in Corinth and the Temple of Aphrodite. Just kind of as I start wandering along, what are kind of the major ways in which religion was an important part of Greek culture?
So religion in the ancient Greek world was in many ways very different from what we think of nowadays as religion. So for starters, they didn't actually have a term for religion the way we do. It was very much a part of everyday life. It was something that you would do at home. It was something you would do in political business, would start with prayers and sacrifices and things like that. But of course also you did have these incredible, huge buildings dedicated to different gods, like Aphrodite. And of course that's another difference, that there are lots and lots and lots of gods in ancient Greek religion.
And what sort of things would have been involved in those kind of big religious experiences centered around these kind of temples?
So there would be public sacrifice, there might be festivals as well, centered on temples and in sanctuaries, processions leading up to them, with different groups of people, perhaps just dressed in different ways, music, dance, all sorts of celebrations, sometimes athletic games or musical contests.
We're in Corinth, which this game kind of heavily plays on Corinth being the city of Aphrodite. You mentioned that there are a lot of gods. Well, what makes Aphrodite different? Who is she, and kind of does she have a persona of her own?
So Aphrodite was primarily, in myth at least, she was primarily the goddess of love, of romantic love, not really marriage love so much. But she could have lots of different aspects, and this is one of the things about the Greek gods that you might be familiar with Zeus or Hera, and you have ideas of that these are gods of Apollo is the god of
Speaking
prophecy.
Of which, I think this is Apollo himself.
We've got Apollo here, exactly. A cult statue of Apollo wrestling a snake, possibly a reference to his defeat of the Pytho at Delphi. This huge sort of snake monster that he defeated. So there are all these stories called myths that tell us a bit about some of the main aspects of the personalities of the gods. But there were many different aspects too. So Aphrodite, yes, the goddess of love, but also she could protect sailors at sea. She could protect soldiers as well, in fact. So there are lots of different parts that could be worshipped in these temples. It wasn't always just the same.
Sure. So we've come across these three gentlemen who seem to be drunkenly dancing. What sort of religious experiences did people have outside of major temples? Was this kind of the norm, or is this a kind of weird quirk of the game that they're kind of trying to add something in, do you think?
Well, I think it depends a bit on where we draw the boundary of religion and religious experience. I mean, there is the very sort of civic and official side of religion, perhaps, but there's definitely also going to be smaller celebrations, possibly in honour of Dionysus and the drinking of the wine.
Okay, so here we are in Olympia, which I guess most people would know best from the Olympic Games. But I don't think most people know that it's also a religious place and a religious festival. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Olympia as a religious place?
Sure. So Olympia is as you say, is of course the site of the famous Olympic Games, and was throughout most of antiquity. But it was also a religious site. It was sacred to Zeus in particular. Also some other gods. Plenty of other gods had temples there by the certainly by the later in later periods. and it had an incredibly famous temple to Zeus,
which I think is
which
this one that
is
we're looking
exactly
at, yeah.
this monumental building here, which was part of this festival. The festival, the Olympic Games, would be held in honor of Zeus and in honor of Pelops as well, who was the founder of the Olympic Games and also had a hero cult here. One of the things that again this temple was so famous for were these metopes, were these beautifully sculpted friezes on the pediments of the temple.
Might go up and have a close
yeah,
look for
exactly.
you.
If we climb up, we climb up. This is again a gigantomachy. So this is the gods battling against in all manner of ways. So we've got Athena here, and Hermes over there, battling against giants. Again, they have all these sort of monstrous bodies, part snake and so on. In this idea of this very early series of battles in which the Olympians, the Olympic gods, sort of took over control of the world.
Why do you think the Greeks, across the kind of Greek world, was so interested in creating and talking about and depicting these kinds of myths?
Well, it's part of a huge amount of debate in the study of Greek religion is how exactly these myths really relate to religion, because so again, one of the big differences to the sort of religion that we might think of is that there is no equivalent to a kind of sacred text like the Bible or something in Greek religion, and then people sometimes think, well, maybe myths are sort of equivalent. I mean, they're definitely not really an equivalent because they were so variable and people could tell different versions and different types of stories, and in one version something completely different might happen and there was no authoritative set text. But the myths clearly were important. I mean, we saw them depicted here. People were constantly telling them and writing about them, and they do tell us a lot about how the gods were perceived, the personalities of the gods, who these gods really were, even if there could be different aspects in different contexts.
So this here is kind of what I found in the game is kind of an avenue of gods and goddesses. Just having a look, do you think you could kind of identify them and see how well they do at kind of invoking some of these gods and goddesses?
I'll have a go. I'm not sure who's that supposed to be, do you think?
I have no idea.
Goddess of the staff.
How about
look at someone
this
else.
one here?
I assume that's Zeus, holding a lightning bolt, which is one of his main attributes, that he wields the lightning bolts that come hurtling down. I guess this is probably Demeter. She's holding a torch and a sort of bowl of perhaps grain or something. Demeter was the goddess of fertility, but she was also associated with nighttime rituals, mysteries they're often called, which is one of the reasons why the torch was probably chosen. This, of course, is Aphrodite, often depicted in the nude, or at least partially nude, and very sort of sensual and beautiful. Dionysus, he's often looks like he's a bit drunk. This is Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. So she's the twin sister of Apollo, who's also associated with archery a lot, but she's a virgin goddess, like Athena as well, and yeah, she's associated with hunting, with sort of youth. Poseidon, got his trident there. So again, an incredibly important god, god of the sea, also god of horses. But the trident sort of a very important and symbolic attribute of his. And then, of course, Athena, again, an incredibly important goddess, and she's often depicted in sort of full armour, goddess of warfare and strategy. So sacrifices formed a part of many of the rituals to the gods. Okay, and here we see a sort of sacrifice taking place. So they would take place on or near an altar to a particular god or goddess, or sometimes also several gods. And the actual sort of moment of sacrifice is the killing of the animal, as you can see here, the ritual killing of an animal, and spilling of the blood on the altar, and then sort of carving it apart into sort of specific portions, some
Yeah.
of which would be burnt to the gods, and others of which would usually be eaten by the people partaking in the sacrifice. And you can see, in fact, this is a very a depiction of the altar of Zeus, which is also quite an unusual one in that it, as you can see behind this carcass, is built is sort of an ash altar, as it's called. It's just this huge pile of ash that, in fact, at least by later antiquity, we are told rose up to sort of almost 7 meters or so in height. Absolutely, that was just sort of made of ashes and earth of all the animals that have been sacrificed to Zeus.
So we've now come quite a long way away from Olympia to the island of Delos. So Delos seems, at least from this, to be kind of dominated by this temple district that we can see in the distance. Why is Delos an important place for the Greeks, and what does it mean?
So Delos was said to be the birthplace of Apollo, and according to which version you read, also Artemis, his sister. Apollo, of course, one of the most important gods for the Greeks, a god of healing, of prophecy, of music, art and culture more generally. Having this site that's so invested with this religiosity, the fact that it's really the birthplace of Apollo, and that this big sanctuary then springs up that celebrates this myth, makes it, I think, a very important site for many Greeks.
Now we're approaching from behind this bronze statue here. Why does this statue, and we'll see it a little bit better when we go around it, look so different from all of the others, do you think?
So this looks quite different from the statues we were looking at in Olympia. So for one thing, it's made of bronze, which was, however, relatively common in the ancient world, quite a valuable type of statue, of course, and absolutely enormous. But bronze statues could be made in great size. I mean, the most famous of which is the Colossus of Rhodes, which was colossal.
Yeah.
But the other thing that looks a bit strange, perhaps, about the statue is its posture, is the fact that it's nude, is the fact that it doesn't look so much like what we might think Apollo looks like. It's because it's from an earlier period. It's from the Archaic period.
Now, I wanted to stop here because I believe this is a herm.
Yes, absolutely.
Obviously, there is something quite distinctively missing from this herm. What are they, and what's their kind of function in Greek society?
So herms are they are called herms because they are depictions in some way of the god Hermes,
which I think is also here.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So here we've got a statue of Hermes with his little sort of hat with his wings and his staff. And Hermes was the god of commerce, so he's often honoured as here in the sort of marketplace area of a city. But he could also be the god of boundaries, and so these herms seem to mark out. They can often be outside buildings or sort of on like street corners and so on, and they seem to mark out space, property, that sort of thing. They are sacred since they are a depiction of Hermes. In some way, and there's a sort of famous episode in the course of the Peloponnesian War in Athens in the late 5th century, where one morning the Athenians sort of wake up and they realize that someone has smashed in all the herms of the city, and it's a huge crisis for them because they think it's a really bad omen. They think their expedition, their naval expedition, is going to go badly as a result, which it does. In fact, and so that really shows this importance of it, and the terror that seizes people when religious statues are broken in this way.
One last question I wanted to ask you before we move on. So most of the statues we've seen thus far have been very plain. They've been just made of marble, but this one here seems to be, I'm not sure who's depicted here, but she seems to be painted. Do you think that's a common thing in the ancient world?
So there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that most statues, if not all, would have been painted. And in fact, people who have worked on this and who've studied the pigments that still remain on some of the statues have done reconstructions a bit like this one, in fact, which suggests to us that perhaps slightly upsettingly most statues would probably have been painted in quite garish colours to us. Again, probably as part of this sort of the luxury would have been shown by this, the costliness of these statues and of all these things dedicated here.
So here we are in Athens, which I don't know about you, but is one of those places in this game that they just kind of wows me every time I look at it. And obviously we have the Parthenon, and
yeah, I mean, absolutely, this is pretty phenomenal. It's also, of course, the site that we probably know most about. I mean, at least on a large scale. So this is pretty exciting.
Athens, obviously, the city of Athena. Why do you think Athena was so important to the Athenians?
Well, I mean, all the gods could be worshipped above any others. I mean, we saw that Aphrodite was important in Corinth, and Zeus in Olympia, and Apollo, of course, on Delos. For the Athenians, it's true. Athena was everything. Athena was everywhere. She was worshipped in all sorts of different, slightly different contexts as well. So Parthenon literally means virgin or maid. So this is Athena Parthenos is just a sort of an emphasis on the fact that she was a virgin goddess. She didn't ever marry or have any children. But there are also other temples on the Acropolis that worship her as Athena Nike, Athena Victory, for instance. She was, of course, very important for warfare, as we said before, and I think that huge statue that we started out on is possibly the Athena Promachos, which we think potentially was one of these huge bronze statues again that we've also been talking about, and Promachos is her and her sort of battle stance. So usually she would sort of have like her spear sort of pointing outwards, and her shield raised in order to show that.
So here we are in Delphi,
Yes.
and I thought we could have a bit of a wander around. So tell us a little bit about Delphi.
So Delphi is probably my favourite site in ancient Greece. It's absolutely phenomenal, both in terms of as you can see, the sort of surrounding landscape, but also the sanctuary. And so Delphi is another really important sanctuary of Apollo, who we've already seen on Delos. And Delphi is a very different type of sanctuary in that it houses an oracle. So the famous, probably the most famous oracle of the ancient world was at Delphi, and Apollo, of course, was also a god of prophecy. So this was really, it's an incredibly religious site again, in that you could actually communicate directly with the god through the prophecies that were uttered by his priestess, who was called the Pythia. And there's lots and lots of stories from the ancient world about the sort of strange like riddles that she spoke, and lots of sort of bizarre and often and oracles and prophecies that usually end up being misunderstood by humans with awful consequences.
So overall, how well do you like this game and its depiction of Greek religion generally?
I think it gives a really impressive idea of the sort of luxury of this. I mean, this amazing, as I said, this amazing landscape around, which I think is such an important part of the actual experience of going to a sanctuary. And this is one of the things that, is really hard to do as an academic. Actually, is to express or understand what it would really have felt like to go and visit the sanctuary of a god. So you can read all the text, you can look at the inscriptions and so on, but actually going to the site or having this incredible reconstruction of this beautiful sort of mountain landscape around, and these luxuriously painted temples and statues all around you, I think is absolutely incredible.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for giving up some of your time to have a play around and have a look around. So if people want to find out more about classics at Oxford, have a look at our website and all of our social media as I die.